So this is a kind of quick introduction to the cloth simulation in Cinema4D. And the cloth simulation works similarly to physics and soft body physics. Except, right, it's generally intended to work with planes. But you can also make, say, like shirts, pants, skirts, things like that, if you're doing this on a body. And so some of the things we talked about with physics are true with cloth as well. So to start with, we can create a cube, which is going to be our collider. And then we can also go ahead and create a plane and lift the plane up so, right, when gravity starts, it'll fall and drop onto there. Because it does use gravity and it uses some of the same kind of rules. You have a cloth tag and a cloth collider tag for things that are collided with. One thing to note is that you have to make the plane editable in order for it to be used by the cloth simulation. You can't just have it be a primitive. The other thing is, to a degree, you want to have, because you can't go forward and change this, and I'd say doing some experimentation and finding out what works is going to, can help. But basically, you want like probably a higher mesh density on your base mesh than this. And I would say 20 by 20 tends to be a good place to go. You can always select all your polygons on a plane and go through the mesh menu and subdivide it that way as well. That will work as just fine. But this is just usually a little bit easier. I'm going to leave it at all the defaults. And then I'm going to go ahead and make that plane editable by hitting C or clicking on wherever they put the editable thing in this iteration. I don't know. It's somewhere. Now that's the asset browser. I should probably figure that out, but I'm not going to do that right now. So when you go through here, then you can, again, you go to tags and you go to simulation tags. And if I zoom in a touch, you'll see that there are 3 options for cloth. There's a cloth belt, which we're not going to talk about today. There's the cloth collider, and there's cloth, right? And so for our plane, we're definitely going to want that to have a cloth tag on it. And if I zoom back out and select my cube, and I can't remember if the cloth cube has to be, if something's a collider, if it has to be editable as well. We're going to find out really quick. Because if this, nope, it does not have to be, right? So, right, so what this has done, right, is the physics engine is dropping this plane. It now knows that this is supposed to behave like cloth. And so you can see it's starting to ripple. Now you'll notice a couple things. Like one, it is pretty chunky, right? Like the polygons are pretty big. It looks pretty terrible the way it's set. But the simulation is running actually really fast, which is what we want. There are, right, the way we can obviously get more polygons is to use a subdivision surface. However, if we use the default standard subdivision surface and we apply it to this cloth, you'll notice that, right, because the way the subdivision surface works, it rounds the corners of the object, right? So if I wanted, like, right, oftentimes blankets, cloths, things like that have hard corners, right? And so that's a little bit problematic. However, there is a solution, which is if I go up to the simulate menu that you can't see because that's the way it works on this thing, and I go down to, no, where is it? Where did they put it? Maybe it's just in, maybe they just moved it in here. Hold on. Yes, okay. So, sorry, they've moved where it was. If you just hold down on the subdivision surface, you'll see the other option there is a cloth surface. If I choose a cloth surface and I make the plane a child of the cloth surface, you'll see that I get a similar amount of rounding now. This actually only has one subdivision, so I'm gonna select the cloth surface. I'm gonna boost it up to like 3. So you can see I have a much finer mesh, but you'll also notice that my corners stay hard. Now there's a couple other nice things about the cloth surface. First, if I render this at this point, you'll see it's much better even without lights or anything on it. It looks a lot more clothy. The other thing, there are a couple other options here that you can use. So honestly, I don't know what the factor is. Oh, awesome. Okay, basically that just adjusts the strength of the subdivision effect across the surface. There is also this thickness option. So you can, if I just put in like say 3 centimeters, the cloth, the whole sheet gets thicker, which is pretty awesome, right? I don't have to do anything other than just say add some thickness. What's nice about this is if you just have a flat 2-dimensional object and you want to add thickness to it quickly, you can do this and then make it editable, and that thickness will stay. It's only going to give you one subdivision on the edge as far as I know. I have not been able to find a way to adjust that. The other thing that you can do is you can check mark bulging. And bulging makes this significantly thicker, and it kind of inflates it. And you'll notice that you do get some like harder edges and pinching that happens in there. And I don't know if that's a factor of just it being a little bit too thick, or if that just means you need to add some more subdivisions. I'm going to say make this, if I make this 1 centimeter, you'll see it still has, right, those harder corners and things. If I increase the number of subdivisions, the bulging still seems to have that effect. I'm not quite sure how useful bulging is. I've never actually used it for anything because every time I try it does this. And I'm not sure if maybe you drop, another cloth surface on top of that, if then you can smooth that bulging out. No, that does not seem to make any difference whatsoever. So I don't typically use bulging. However, thickness can be really great because it can give you the thickness that you need. And here with 5 levels of subdivisions, the cloth is really pretty smooth. Right? I'm going to go ahead and turn the cloth surface off because I don't want to have that take a lot of time. So I want to show you some of the attributes for the cloth tag. So if I click on the cloth tag on the plane and zoom in a touch, you'll notice some similar things to the to the soft body physics. There's stiffness, flexion, rubber, bounce, friction, mass, and then size. And then there's this use tear option down here at the bottom that we'll talk about in a bit. So if I was to, say, dial my stiffness way down and run this simulation again, you'll see that it basically crinkles a bit more. I don't know how else to describe it. And I'm still getting some, stiffness around these corners where, right, that corner edge is pushing on this big polygon that I've got. If I go ahead and increase my flexion and drop this down, you'll see that it basically has a bit more spring to it. If I drop that down, you can see that it really starts to stretch more. And similarly, if I take the rubber amount and boost that, I get a really like slimy cloth, right? It really starts to stretch and deform, right? So you can make a more like rubber-like material. And I'm going to go ahead and dial that down. If I, well, I'm going to leave it the way it is. If I dial down my friction some, right, obviously that means it's just going to slide over those surfaces easier. So if I drop rubber down a bit so it's not so tight, you'll see that, you know, because it's catching on the four edges of this, it's not really sliding off. But if I was to rotate this cube, you know, a few degrees, oh, a cube's going to be problematic because it's got corners. You will notice, did you see how it kind of stabbed through that first time? That was just because I made a change in the middle of the simulation. But yeah, if I had my friction down, this could slide off. I could have, you know, whatever on there. Okay, let me get this cloth tag up again. I'm going to go ahead and make the stiffness back to 100. You can kind of see how much stiffer that makes it. But again, all of these things are going to impact what we're doing. And, you know, because I'm having these huge hard corners popping on this, what I may do is just go to my plane. Oops, that was not the right button. There we go. And go up to Mesh, Add, and Subdivide. And I'm going to do 2 more subdivisions. So now my base mesh is much higher. And if I run this at this point, right, I'm going to get a better simulation around those corners. Right, it's still a little bit chunky, which is again, but you'll notice, right, I've already got a lot going on here. If I turn this cloth surface on now, granted 5 iterations, it's going to be totally dark. I'm going to set this down to 3 and then just say garage shading. You can see I'm getting, you know, it's kind of noisy because of some of the settings I have on here most likely, where my Flexion is pretty high. If I set that a little bit lower, I might get a cleaner look. You can see with, right, with all, oh, that's still gross. Oh, I wonder if friction being so low is part of it. Let's put that back to 90. And I can't remember what rubber was at, if it was at like 25% or what before. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. That's so gross. Yeah, so, right, so it's a little bit sloppy right now. Obviously, making some adjustments. I don't know if it's if my stiffness is just like way too high to be useful, or if it's the thickness that is actually causing some of this. Okay, but so you can, you know, drape cloth on objects, and when you use tear, I don't know if it, I don't know if there's going to be enough force to do this. We'll see. Maybe if I move this up further. Oh yeah, so something to note, right? I'm trying to pull this plane up, and because I have the cloth tag on there, nothing is changing. I'm going to turn this off. So it goes a little faster. Nothing is changing, but you'll notice that, right, everything is going totally crazy at this point. And that's because I turned use tear on. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that for a second. So what tear does is it actually allows the cloth to tear. And it also causes strange behavior sometimes. So what I was saying though is, right, I can't move this plane. So what I need to do in order to do that is if I go to the if I'm on my tag here and I go to the cache tag, if I, is it that or is it, where is it? Oh, here we go. If I uncheck the enable on the simulation here on the very first basic tab, I think then I can, yes. At that point I can move this plane wherever I want to move it. Like if I want to move it there and have it fly off of this thing. And then I can go here, click enable again. Oh, and it jumps back to where it was. Okay, let's see. I don't have that on. What am I doing wrong? What am I missing? Sorry. Let me see if I can, now that I've broken this, let's see if I can. Okay, there we go. Sorry, that's hilarious. So part of this is the friction is set really high, so the cloth is hitting that and sticking. If I was to adjust the friction and, oh, is it forces? No, it's under tag. If I was to take my friction and make it like 10%, it should, ideally, slide off the edge. There it goes. It's still falling apart in the horrible way, and that's because when I was undoing things, use tear was still left on. So if I turn that off, right, now I get a much more interesting simulation of a cloth falling and floating around itself. Okay, so so you can see, though, it's right, it is all sorts of entangled on itself right now, which is not necessarily a good thing. So there is, if I go to my cloth tag, under forces, one of the options is self-repulsion. I have no idea if the default settings are going to result in chaos or not, but let's go ahead and see. Now you'll notice this simulation runs a lot slower, but it should keep itself from intersecting, I think. There's a lot of stretch happening here, and those corners are really clawing on for dear life. It's so dramatic. I'm going to stop it right here, maybe. You'll notice that even though I hit stop, it took a couple more frames. It is intersecting some, but it's not as bad as it was. I could potentially increase the force, increase or decrease the distance, set up some damping. If you get them way out of whack, it will actually just like kind of explode away from itself. And if I was to turn the cloth surface back on and render this, it actually doesn't, I mean, it's definitely folded on itself, but it doesn't look super terrible. The other thing you can do, what I did to move that cloth was, let me go back to frame 0 and hit H, hit 3, okay. To adjust the position of this cloth is a two-step process. So just to go through it again, you go to the basic tag on your cloth tag, uncheck enable, then you adjust the position of the plane, and then you go to the dresser, and under the dresser there's all sorts of settings here, and we're going to do some fixing of points here in a second. But there is the init state, which basically says set the state that this should start at, right? And so in our case, I just moved it. I've set the initial state. I'm going to zoom back out. And so now, and then I have to remember to go back to the basic and enable this again. And once I've done that, it'll redo the simulation from there. I'm going to actually disable the self repulsion right now because it's taking so long to simulate that. And so, so the cloth is on there. So what's nice about this is I can also do a couple additional things at any point in here. So what I can do now is, let's say maybe this is the object I want, or this is what I want to initialize at, so it's not falling every time and doing some things. So I can go to the dresser. I can set the init state. And so now if I was to go back to the basic tag here and uncheck enable, now I could move this cloth wherever I want to in its current state. Now the other cool thing that I can do, I'm going to uncheck that. The other cool thing that I can do when it's not enabled and I've set this as the initial state is I can go through and fix things at the polygon level. So I can go to, sorry, I'm going to go up to polygons mode, and I'm just going to use I'm going to use the brush tool wherever that's at. Here we go, the brush. And instead of smear, I'm just going to go down to smooth. And where there's like some of these little errors, like maybe I don't want those points there, I can come in here and just smooth that out. And then maybe smooth some of these corners out too. Granted, that's going to make it round into the cube, which is not what I want to have happen. So maybe I won't do that there. But here, maybe I want to smooth some of this. Maybe that little choppiness of some of these draped parts, I can come down and smooth. And I'm just going to keep going around these edges and do this. If for whatever reason I really want something, maybe it's intersecting on this corner, or it's too close, or I don't want it really pulled around there, I could go to pull, and I could say, is there a direction? I don't know. We'll just pull and see what happens. Oh no, that's not going the direction I want it to go. Oh, I guess repel might. No, that's gonna. Actually, if I just do pull around these corners where you can see there's this intersection here, if I do pull, I can actually pull that out away from there so it's not intersecting anymore. And if I did that a few times, then went back and did a smooth, I can smooth that out and have it not intersect on that corner. Now, once I've done all of this, that doesn't mean that I'm done with the simulation. I can go back and go to my plane, go to my cloth tag, which is currently not set, and I can pop this back to frame 0 and go to the basic, enable this, and because I set this as the initial state, now I can run this some more from where it left off, right? Granted, some of that smoothing didn't really matter because then it's gonna be set, but it's something where you can go through and you can make modifications to that mesh and just sort of pop in and out of the simulation mode, which is really pretty powerful because you can make little tweaks. You can be like, oh, it shouldn't be all wrapped up on itself like that. Let's smooth this out a touch. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the basics. One other thing I want to show you is just pinning the mesh, because that's also really useful. I'm just going to create a new scene, I'm going to create a new plane. I'm going to set it up so it is, let's do x plus. I'm going to make this 40 and 40 this time in terms of the height and width segments. Make it editable so that I can use cloth on it. Then I am going to go ahead and go to my simulation tags. I'm going to go to cloth. And if I run this, it should just fall into infinity. There it goes. However, if we go to the dresser tab on the cloth, and you'll notice that there's this fix points. We're not going to worry about seaming polys right now, but there's this fix points. And so if I go to points mode and I use my live selection tool and I just say select, I'm just going to select half of this top edge so we can see what happens. So I'm going to select half of that top edge. I'm going to go back to my cloth tag and I'm going to come down here to fix points. I'm going to click set. And when I do that, you'll see the sets turn purple, which the points turn purple, which means they are set. And what that means is that now if I go ahead and play this, the cloth is going to hang from those points, right? And it's doing a nice little bouncy thing because it's kind of stretchy. If I stop this simulation, go back to frame 0, I can come over here, I can clear those points. And then I'm actually just going to go ahead and select, like, I don't know, maybe 5 here and just 5 here on the other end to start with, or however many that is. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to set that set and then run this again, right? And so you can kind of see that it, hangs and stretches between those points. So you can imagine this being used in a variety of ways to create something that drapes off of a person, because you could link these points like kind of close to like the shoulder, so you could make a cape pretty easily on a model, curtains, things like that. The other thing you can do with cloth is there are forces. There's also the expert tab, which we're not going to talk about quite right now. This is actually, the expert tag is like if you're having issues where the cloth is intersecting the corner of an object that it's supposed to drape around, you can increase the EPS values for the edges and polygons and things, or decrease them to adjust basically how it handles corners. So the other thing you can do is apply forces. So this is outside of the physics engine, right? These two things are separate. So gravity is negative 9.18, but if I was to make that 9.18 and then run this, the cloth is going to try and float up, right? Because I've inverted gravity. If I want it to be more floaty and slower, I could set gravity to negative, like, I don't know, 3.4 or something. And you'll see that I get significantly less drop. Now, this can be really useful because you could use this to have like a more controlled draping on a particular object. You can also set wind direction. So if I say wind direction in X is 3 centimeters. And I actually give it wind strength of, I don't know, 10. How about wind strength of 1? Right, so you can simulate things blowing in the wind pretty easily as well. If I wanted it to feel more floaty, it looks like it's already in Z at 1 by default. If I was to say 2 in the Y, it should lift a little bit more, which it seems like it's doing. If I increase the turbulence, let's go ahead and increase this to 200 frames. Right, the turbulence will make it, right, have more variety in the way the wind blows. I can adjust drag. I can set this lift to be, I don't know, 50%. So it should lift significantly higher, right? There's a lot of ways that I can tweak the way something like this hangs. The air resistance works as well. Self-repulsion, again, right, that keeps it from getting too close to itself. It helps with stopping self-collisions. The other thing, right, you can turn on self-collision here, which again is going to slow everything down. But that's also another way to stop it from colliding in ways that you don't want. Now, there's all sorts of other advanced settings you can use here. The last thing I want to know for you to know is that, right, especially if you've say turned on self-repulsion, right, which is like, you can actually see it kind of pushing off of itself a bit here. Right, this greatly slows down your render or your simulation. So if I want to use all that and I'm happy with the results, I can go to the cache tag and I can go to calculate cache. And what that will do is it pre-calculates all of the things that I've done to the cloth. Hopefully. It takes a while. And it's just going to keep going and going and going and going. Okay. And so now it should play back in real time because it is cached. And I love the end of that where it really breaks. But so it's cached, which is really great because then I can add a cloth surface, and it shouldn't slow down the, let me go ahead and make this 2 or 3. It shouldn't slow down the, I wonder if the factor smooths that up. No, that's actually making it worse. Huh. Although that looks kind of cool. Right, so I should then, so then the simulation is cached, right? I can do whatever it is I'm going to do. Obviously, my settings are not fantastic. Maybe if I wanted to use this frame, it would work. And I could always go ahead and disable everything, smooth stuff, and then I think the cache would be broken at that point. But yeah. So that's the basics of cloth, right? You can pin things, you can just drape stuff. You can always rework and smooth things if they fold over on themselves too much. Yeah, that's the basics. Any questions about cloth? No? It's fun to use, especially when it goes haywire. Except when you don't want it to go haywire. With tear, when you have things pinned, it will actually tear the cloth and chunks will go flying if your wind speed and other forces are high enough. But getting that set up right just takes some time, and I'm not going to take more time to do that right now. So, awesome.